Hi guys. So I am looking at a photograph in obviously in library. I can look at it in my grid view. I can select it, go over to develop. You guys know all this already. Taking a look at this very quickly, I look over at my histogram. I'm definitely probably going to bring those highlights and those whites down to avoid some of that clipping. Um, Part of what I want to talk about is what we had started to talk about today, looking over at the color mixer. Now, again, I have the most updated version of Lightroom. The ones on your desktops may be slightly different. If you have an even older version, it will say something called HSL, which is for the hue, saturation, and luminance. But for our purposes, I'm just going to obviously talk about it as the color mixer. So you can see mixer and point color. Looking at the mixer, you see hue, saturation, and luminance. Just as a reminder, hue is basically the color, right? We all know there's different versions of red, different versions of green. So as I select the hue, and obviously my picture has a lot of greens in it, so I can take that green slider and I can change it. So that starts to look a little yellow, and that starts to look a little more springy, right? A little more like, less like winter bamboo, more like spring bamboo. I might like to change that a little bit. I can also look at this. This is red-orange. I could potentially change that. Again, this is a color. Let's look at saturation. Moving over to saturation. You're familiar with this with the major slider, right? Bringing up all the colors. So looking at the picture, I can maybe bring up that red a tiny bit. It's also a little bit of orange. Let's try the green. Right. Not too heavy-handed. Luminance is how light it is. Again, I could bring it up a bit, bring it down, depends on what you want. I would say maybe a little bit more. And there you go. Looking at this now, I would say I might bring it up just the exposure overall a little bit. Now, there appears to be a little bit of, we're looking at the histogram, some clipped tones. Again, this is the sky, right? It's not completely white. I can see the edge of the frame, but that's because it was an overcast day and the highlights got blown out. Again, I could try to bring it down even more, but I'm not going to have any detail there. But that's just so it doesn't fall off the page, right? Meaning it just doesn't blend into the page. So coming back down here, I might increase the contrast, maybe not. I might do the overall saturation. Right. So after I want you to take a look over on the left. You understand what presets are, and you understand what history means, right? You can go back several steps. I want to show you the snapshots function, which can act a little bit in place of the virtual copy, as well as you can use it along with the virtual copies. So I just did all these edits. I'm coming over to my snapshots to the left. I'm going to click the plus sign. It's going to have the default will be the date and the time. You obviously can change that. I'm going to call this one color, and I'm going to hit create. You notice it shows up under the snapshots. So I like this picture, but I think I maybe want to look at this in black and white. So I'm going to come back over to the editing panels. I'm going to click black and white. And yeah, for my purposes, I like black and white more because I like the tonality and the texture coming through the bamboo. So it probably would want to Maybe increase that just a little bit. Increase the exposure. Now, if you recall, the color now turns to something called black and white. I can do the same thing I did before. I know I have some greens, right? So I could darken some greens. I could bring them up. There definitely is some yellow in there. I can alter that. Similar things that we did before with the colors. When it was a color photograph, I can do with the black and white. So I now can come back over to my snapshots, select the plus sign, and call this black and, whoops, white. Create. Now under our snapshots, we see both, and I can just toggle in between. So if you're ready, y'all understood, how we export. If you're ready to export it, you just select which one you wanted, right? And you would export it, and it would export it as whatever file you tell it to, JPEG, TIFF, Photoshop, and it would have that particular edit. You can do multiple ones. You could add to this, right, and create black and white too. You could add a preset, right? Do that as color too. Ooh, I kind of like that one, right? Or that one. Again, you could just hit the snapshot button again and create a whole nother snapshot. So that's similar to virtual copy. You can use either or both. One other thing I want to show you is, let's say I do like these black and white edits that I did, and I have a series, right? I have a series of images that I took at the same time. They have similar lighting. They're obviously of the same subject. They're pretty much identical lighting, honestly, because I took them very quickly. But I like the settings that I did here. Now, we talked about creating your own preset. You can also go up to the very top where it says settings, copy the settings, and you will see this box shows up, and everything that you potentially altered, notice you can uncheck all of them and check certain things. And please notice also, I didn't necessarily do all of these changes, but the balance, the exposure, the highlights, all the color, etc., right? Anything that I did, it will be copied. I can hit copy. I can then come to another picture, and I can hit, going up to settings, I can hit paste the settings, right? So this is very helpful if you have a group of pictures that you, basically the same lighting, things are very similar, and you want to treat them the same. So that's a copy and paste mechanism. Another thing I want to show you before we end this particular video is when I have one of my images selected, right? I can go up to the very top where it says photo. I think that's cut out of your screen, but where it says photo. And I can scroll down to where it says edit in, and this is how I can edit in Adobe Photoshop. And I have Adobe Photoshop 2025. Mine's updated. You all have Adobe Photoshop 2024. I can't remember if there's a whole lot of differences, but I just want to show you really quickly how it opens up into Adobe Photoshop. Now, since that is indeed going to be our next thing we talk about, I just want to do you a quick preview of Adobe Photoshop. I know some of you have used it before, some people have not. Don't be scared. It is actually a little terrifying at first. It's a little overwhelming, but we're going to do some basic stuff in it. And what I want to show you today is, once you have opened up Photoshop, you will see at the top there's something that says window, And when you select it, you will see something called Workspace. It is normally on Essentials or Default. That is perfectly fine. As you go further along in this, you can create your own. You'll see I have Allison here. You can create your own workspace. You don't have to worry about that. Essentials is great for our purposes. I actually prefer it over the photography one. So you can just leave it on that default. That just means certain things automatically pop up, the toolbars on the left, etc. If there's something you don't see, and I'll be repeating this, don't worry, the main things that you are going to be needing to have open are the layers. Photoshop's all about layers. The adjustments, it's also all about adjustments, right? And your toolbar will automatically be open. But the other thing I always recommend people open up is, you guessed it, history. Now you'll notice sometimes it pops up at various places. Don't worry about it. You can grab the bars and move them. You can make them smaller, all this good stuff, right? You have a little more space than on your desktop than I do on my laptop. But history is just like history anywhere else. So taking a quick look, I just want you to notice that I have my toolbar on the left, and the very first one is the move tool. Second one, these next three are our selection tools, which in a couple weeks we'll be starting to talk about. We have the crop tool, which is similar to the crop tool in Lightroom. You've got things like the spot healing brush tool, a little, similar to what we've learned in Lightroom. The only other thing I'm going to talk about or just point out to you down at the bottom here, you've got two little swatches and a little arrow that you can switch. You will notice right now red is the color. If I select that, it brings up a color palette. I'm going to hit cancel for that. I'm not going to change it out right now. I just want you to see that. The other aspect, I'm going to do Command and minus and make my picture a little smaller, just the way I look at it in the screen. And what I want you to see over here on the right in the layers, right, is I want you to just, again, every time you hover over anything, it's going to give you information. I just want you to watch as I come down to the bottom of my layers panel, and on the plus sign, I'm going to hit create a new layer, and suddenly I have two layers. I can select that layer, and I'm just showing you this really quickly, okay, just to have you see something. We'll go over this more. I'm going to select a brush. I am going to paint all over that. And you will notice it is on this layer. If y'all look over to the right, it's not on my background, which is my picture. I had that selected. This little eyeball turns it off, and it's like it was never there. So this is just for you to start to begin to understand Photoshop, the basic layout, and Photoshop is all about layers. The next thing I do want to show you, because we'll be talking about this in class, when you're looking at your, looking up at the, the top, I couldn't think of the word. There's a couple things that we are going to be focused on for this first part, for this first assignment. And when you're looking at the top, it says View, and you want to scroll down to something that says Guides. You'll see Rulers, Snap, and Guides. This is important. Guides, we are going to select a new guide layout, and I want you to see, obviously you can change this color. This is default. It's pretty normal. People use this color as the default in Photoshop. This is not going to show up on your picture, guys. This is virtual. This is help you to sort of measure out things. They're literally guides. You will notice it has columns and it has rows. So if I wanted to divide my picture into fourths, right? I just did 2 columns and 2 rows. I hit OK. And again, this is all just virtual. But this is going to be helpful, and I'll review this in class, because when we go to create this next assignment, which will be diptychs and triptychs, which will be multiple images on one virtual piece of paper, the guides will become very handy. Will become handy. So that was view, that was guides, right? And Snap 2 are important because when you have something that you were trying to select, for example, it will snap to the guides. Once you have this selection, that's when you can do fun things like copy, and then you can paste, and then you can move that around, right? I'm sorry, I moved the wrong thing. So this is just to show you. I'll go over this again. But this is the very beginning, the fun time of Photoshop. I am going to, and I want you to notice too, it did indeed open it, right? I want to save it as a TIFF. So my original raw file is still not affected. I'm going to quit Photoshop. And I want you to notice, because I had my Lightroom open, Adobe likes to talk to itself, right? Speak to itself. And it's showing up in my catalog, right? So now I have my original. I have this TIFF. You could also have saved it as a Photoshop file. And I can open that back up in Photoshop and play with it more. So that's going to be it. And I'm going to hide Lightroom, and I'll see you in the next one.